Good evening, everyone. Welcome to the first in-person talk for MySec Southfield. It's been some time, but we're glad to have everyone back. Quick announcements. We do have a new co-director for Southfield. It's going to be Ed. Ed and I will be managing everything. He's been a strong supporter, and I can't remember him missing any events or socials, so he definitely lives and breathes Southfield. That's definitely a good thing. But given that we're starting a little late, we're going to go ahead and just jump right into it. We have our guest speaker today. We have Mike Behrmann. Extensive experience. The talk's going to be about tales from the Decrypt Keeper. A lot about the ransomware cases that he's been working and involved in. And without further ado, Mike.
Thank you. Sorry. Appreciate you guys coming. You already know the title. I won't belabor that. Also, longtime MySec member, also longtime lurker in the MySec group. Definitely not saying a whole lot, but seeing, watching. I won't read this abstract word for word, but this is largely what we're trying to get at. We constantly talk in cybersecurity about threat actors, what they do, what they perpetrate. I see the flip side of that too, though. I see an entire discussion that needs to be had about the environments that get victimized. And this isn't about victim shaming at all, of course. There's always budgetary concerns, there's the will, there's talent, there's all sorts of things that feed into this. But I wanted to talk about some of the environments and situations that we saw at Antigen to help you guys be better, right? Quick outline. I'll start with a bio, a quick opening thought, a handful of victim case studies taken from the small to medium-sized business and mid-market space, some themes, best practices, and I'll leave with a final thought. For the people who care to know method-wise, the method was ultra simplistic as far as how I evaluated the security tech stacks of these companies, right? If you have AV in an old school firewall, you fit in the not great end of the spectrum, right? If you've got XDR, a fully built SIM that's configured and reading in everything, next-gen firewalls, zero trust, you're on the better side. And then there's a lot of people in the middle. That's the general methodology. So we'll start with each case, give a summary, talk about root cause, talk about the positive client steps, because some of these case studies are people that did great things in adverse situations. And then we'll also talk about those learning opportunities, those lessons learned that hopefully you guys take away. Also, I'd love to make this a dialogue. I know that gets said in a lot of these talks. We got like 18 people here. I'd love to have a conversation as we're going along. If you guys have questions about something that's unclear, want to just discuss a particular point, I'm happy to do that. We don't necessarily need to wait till the end. I've given this one other talk in a private setting. Having that dialogue, made it that much more real to everybody in attendance. Quick bio about me. I have a weird background. I was a liberal arts guy in college and grad school, actually, and got obsessed with cyber warfare while studying international affairs, particularly China. Realized I needed to go back to school to learn IT engineering, did that. That was paid for by the NSA. I was hired in a counterintelligence capacity there, spent my entire career in that counterintelligence function. Then I worked for the NSA's Computer Network Exploitation Office for about 7 years. Lastly, I was deployed to FBI Detroit Division here downtown to work as part of the Cyber Task Force. The last 2 years or so, I was with the NSA, basically just helping with victim notifications and getting drawn into the defensive security side of the house. So in addition to not having that classic IT background, I got thrust into offensive security from the jump. despite having more history knowledge than anything, and then came back and sort of fell in love with defensive security. I've been doing it ever since. And then the last 7 years, mainly security operations, having the good fortune to work with people like Emily, doing some threat hunting, working in the managed detection response space with companies like Blumira. And then most recently, I am the Director of Digital Forensics and Incident Response at Antigen Security, based in here in Detroit. This quote came out just as I was composing the slides a couple months ago, but I thought it hit on the head a lot of what I wanted to talk about, sort of set up the conversation that I wanted to have. This is Chris Inglis. Chris Inglis was the Deputy Director of the NSA when I was there. He's now like a cyber czar within the White House. I don't know. He is beloved by everybody who knows him. He's one of the true good guys, not necessarily one of the people that ran to the private sector to make a whole bunch of money. He's a true public servant. So when he weighs in on these issues, I tend to listen. What he said was, in a world where clicking on the wrong link or neglecting a single software patch can result in geopolitical incident, responders often focus on the attack's perpetrators at the expense of addressing the perverse incentives that create circumstances in the first place. What he's talking about is, was presented in what's called a cyber social contract, which came out in a famous international affairs journal called Foreign Affairs. And it's a compelling idea, difficult in execution, but ultimately it revolves around US businesses taking that information security seriously. You'll see in the next several case studies people that didn't. Some that did, many that did not though. People do not realize that they can become a victim. And two, they don't realize how goddamn hard it is to get yourself out of a ransomware situation if you've been neglecting information security for years, decades, so forth, in any way, shape, or form. First client, we're going to start with small to medium-sized business clients and then work our way up to mid-market. SMB client one, medium maturity tool stack. So imagine having maybe a SIM that's mostly configured, a decent endpoint security product, your basic next generation firewall, nothing exotic though, just the basics, but maybe they're done well. This particular client was in the manufacturing space on the East Coast. There's been a raft of obviously different vulnerabilities, whole families of vulnerabilities that have been seen in the past year related to exchange exploitation. They were a victim of that. They came to realize it when they saw 5,000 emails being sent from an account in their network. That was the first and only sign they saw of malicious behavior. And for them, like a lot of companies, it was a loss of face. The people that get these emails aren't necessarily random. They're people in their contacts and inboxes, right? They're clients. They are people that are sending messages that have email chains that are in the actual Exchange server itself. So they're familiar, right? So you lose some face there, but it happens, right? The only upshot was the attacker gave up then. The Exchange cluster itself was connected to the entire environment. They could move laterally with administrative credentials and pivoted anywhere they wanted to go, but they didn't. Interesting situation. Absolutely no trusted backups. They were not patching anything. And the funny story about that is the managed service provider wasn't doing anything. They weren't ticketing anything. They weren't patching anything. And when I say they weren't patching, I mean years. Not like, hey man, I'm going to get to that patch that's from last week. I know it's urgent. I mean years. And they were paying this company to do all of their IT. You know, they put all their trust in there and they got burned bad. Literally during the course of our investigation, we could not roll out tools because the MSP did not have a command of the network. In the beginning of a DFIR case, the first thing we need to do is basically tool set out, right? Starting usually with an RMM solution and then throwing in different triage tools, collection tools, you name it. But the first step is relying on the victim client or their MSP to roll out tools. They couldn't do that. There was no SCCM in this instance. There was no PDQ. I think somebody in our company who may or may not be here had to actually just write something in PowerShell to help them do it. It was a bad scene, and it's a miracle that it ended with just some phishing emails going out or whatever the hell was going on. One of the worst cases I've ever seen, though, not from the impact, but the ineptitude internally, right? And they had a single IT guy who was a full-time, meant well, pretty much hung over the entire time. But they, things were shut down for a while, it impacted their operations and it cost them a lot of money.
So that IT guy, did he know anything at all about the managed service provider?
No. There was zero auditing or validation of anything the MSP had done for years.
Okay, yeah. I can see why he might, if he wasn't hungover, he might be by then.
Yeah, I'd be hungover after that happened too. It was genuinely awkward to go through. We were able to make things right, get them patched, obviously secure the environment, speak to the integrity of the environment, that it hadn't been intruded upon any further. But it was a bad scene. When we talked about recommendations, one of the things we always do in our cases is we end any report in a series of recommendations, just like a penetration test would. There was a lot there to talk about, right? The CEO had questions, not necessarily of us, but maybe some of the people that he entrusted with. But that's an important lesson. SMB Client 2, another medium maturity security stack. They had a SIM, partial deployment, some logs coming in, things like the firewall, but maybe not Windows event logs, maybe not EDR tools, things like that. Some trusted backups. Accidentally, they did not know they had a backup system going on. Did not know, but some backups of a handful of key servers happened to be backed up like 1 or 2 days beforehand, so they were good enough. In this particular case, it was a very small ransomware group called Deep Blue Magic that basically just bricked the volume. They weren't asking for money. They just bricked everything, the whole volume, the whole drive volume across everything.
Do you consider that ransomware if they're not actually ransoming?
It was pretty interesting. It's what's funny is that's a good question. It's touching on something that's happening in my. The question was, does that qualify as ransomware? It gets grouped as ransomware, but truthfully, you're right. It's not necessarily that. Things are splintering to go in the direction of data extortion, pure data extortion, no ransom malware involved, no encryption of any kind. Just we steal your data, come pay us, like the Lapsus stuff that makes headlines over and over again. That's becoming a model. We've encountered scenarios like that, and then to pay, and they don't. You know what I mean? It's actually that simple. But it's a good question, though. Like I said, some trusted backups, we were able to get them back online in about 3 days. They had incomplete 2FA. This is what I mean by that. Everybody had 2FA for remote access except one admin account called admin. The VPN appliance was logging diligently. Interestingly, there was no reconnaissance. We had weeks, if not months, of VPN logs. They knew the password right away. So they either bought it, They fished it earlier, something, we don't know. But one day they just guessed it, and there's no 2FA applied. They get in as a client, and they're able to move because of their elevated privilege level. They had no command of their SIM at all. The logging that was enabled was probably happenstance, probably part of the original deployment, and never followed up on. Absolutely zero segmentation. It was a completely flat network too. And this is a retail provider. We'll call them in the Midwest. Everybody in here has probably heard of them too. So this is not an obscure name. This is a familiar brand. The one thing they did have was the next-gen firewall logs. So I misspoke. There was a little bit of segmentation between, I think there was two sectors. There was the VPN where that sat in like a DMZ, and then everything else. So the NGFW actually captured the RDP activity that you expected post initial access and so forth. But again, the backup strategy was really, we just got lucky, right? And one server tied together 9 different business sectors in that company. A giant database of customer information. They had neglected, I'd known this client for a long time, long before I came to Blumira in another life. They had neglected security for a very long time. Never really looked to improve their endpoint security posture. Never took the network level appliances that seriously. Very minimalist, bordering on irresponsible. And they got burned. They got burned, and they bricked everything. Like I said, it was a very destructive attack, which is almost unusual. Now we're going to go up into the mid-market space. So when I say mid-market, I mean 2,000 endpoints or so, or 2,000 users and up, employees and up. So it gets bigger. You would think it gets more sophisticated. Wait, sorry, what's up?
Quick question for you.
Yes.
I'm just curious. I don't know if you have visibility into this, but do you know how long it took for that large mid-maturity security stack customer to recover from that?
It took 1 week. They were hard
1
down.
week.
They were writing down orders on pen and paper for a week across 9 business units in the retail space. So wasn't easy, right? That's in person. That's affecting your customer experience in a negative way. Yeah, their main database was out, minus a backup they may have had. But the thing about a DFIR investigation is the recovery cannot begin until scoping and containment are complete, right? And so, yeah, they found some backups a day or so into the engagement. I can't give the green light on that until, we know the threat actor is no longer there, right? That took some time, especially as we're going through the VPN logs and things like that.
How did they initially know that they were compromised versus their hardware died? Or, was there?
I think they actually got an email from the threat actor.
Okay.
It was like a self-attribution. So the great thing is attribution's almost never an issue in DFIR these days. I mean, there's one thing if you're looking at APT, but in ransomware, everybody self-identifies, right? And so they emailed a random person in the company who had no relation to IT. That person forwarded the email to the head of IT, and that's how they knew what happened.
Okay.
But again, I think it speaks to, we'll sort of touch on this at the end, they did not have a command of the technology in their own environment. And increasingly, good security is judged by good resiliency, right? It's not just that protection, it's not just detection, it's not just response or recovery, it's all those things. It's resiliency, it's being able to survive an attack, recognize it early, that kind of thing. These guys had no understanding of the technologies in their own environment, right? They didn't understand what their SIM was collecting. They didn't understand where they had 2FA applied or didn't. This was not an exotic attack. You know what I mean? There are no high sophisticated skills being shown here. These are really simple things. They probably bought the access from an access broker on the dark web, something like that maybe. Ugly situation. Midsize client 1. This was one of the preeminent industrial companies in the United States and is actually a transnational company. When you look at the totality of who's a subsidiary of who and whatnot, like so many others in 2021 and 2022, they were a victim of one of the proxy logon vulnerabilities. Here again, they had absolutely no patch management schedule. Again, so not an exotic attack. The attacker, proxy logon was released. Within about a month of that, the attacker exploits onto the actual Exchange server, throws down a remote monitoring and management tool, off the shelf, Screen Connect, AnyDesk, whatever, and then pieces out for 4 months. I don't know if that was an access broker. It reads like an access broker type situation because it was such a long period of idle time. Obviously, they were completely unaware at this point still. Ultimately, it was found to be a Conti ransomware case. Conti eventually purchased that access to that Exchange server, began pivoting around, used a batch script once they had enumerated the environment to basically once. So they're hard down, and this is an OT type environment, of course, right? So this is premier industrial company in North America. Hard down. They happen to be off that week from a manufacturing or scheduling perspective, but everybody's sweating blood. Zero trusted backups. None. And they actually had an IT staff, interestingly enough. They had 3 or 4 IT guys, 0 dedicated to security. They had no endpoint security at all. I've mentioned that I belabored the patching already. When it came time to containment and looking at the network layer picture, they didn't know how to use their firewall. They didn't know how to export logs. So somebody in this room had to jump in there and basically teach them how to run a query against their own logs, export those. And that ended up taking 2 days. That was relevant because we ultimately needed to use that firewall because in the absence of a more mature endpoint technology, whether it's an RMM, an EDR, whatever have you, we actually had to disconnect the internet for like an hour and then build in exceptions one by one to trusted sources. So their command, or lack thereof, of a very old Cisco ASA firewall actually hurt them, right? Cost them money, cost them hard downtime. And we're paid by the hour, by the way. So you can take as long as you want. I'll just keep billing, you know what I mean? I don't mean that in a weird way, but this time is money for everyone. I think sometimes the impact of a ransomware case gets attention in terms of internal operations and stuff like that. Trust me, the consultants you bring to help unscrew the network cost money too. And the longer you take, if you have insurance at all, the more they're going to grimace. It's not going to be great, right? And your premiums are going to skyrocket. So it was a difficult situation. The other big thing that went around with the case, and we own some of this too, they had never been through an incident scenario. Neither they or their parent companies in Europe had ever been through an incident scenario. What that meant in practice was everybody's freaking the fuck out. And Europe is asking hour 2 into a DFIR investigation, what the root cause is. And that became our overriding. We had no other mission at that point, given that customer direction for a time. Why does that matter? Conti was still in the network. Conti sticks around in a network for an extra week or two, in addition to preparing the environment for ransom for about a week as well. They stick around. They want to make sure, they want to see that money through, see that extortion attempt through. Forensically, we were able to identify that this day 2 of our investigation, they were still actively exfiltrating information using mega upload, just on a server we hadn't gotten to yet, because we were trying to work things backwards. We were trying to take, we didn't know it was an exchange issue at the time. We were basically taking a random box and trying to figure out root cause. I'll never make that mistake again. But that was the political climate at the time for that customer. And it wasn't, the client itself was actually pretty reasonable. The overlords in Europe were less patient. So it's an interesting case. A lot of voices in a situation like this.
Smells German to me.
German speaking. German speaking. Mid-sized client 2. Yes. Okay. This is an old company in the industrial or manufacturing space in North America. Here again, there were no positives. Nothing went right. It turned out that this particular client did not have access to the entire network worldwide. This was a worldwide set of networks connected over VPNs, site-to-site VPNs. They get ransomed. One business unit, one sector, one segment of the network gets ransomed. We're called in. There's no backups there, by the way, at all. But we're called in. As per usual, we're trying to get our tools rolled out. We need that assistance early on to get our remote monitoring and management tool out so that everything else can follow. Headquarters did not have access to the subsidiary. Had no network connectivity there. Anybody that's familiar with European business culture knows those guys go at 4 o'clock. They don't care what's going on. And that's exactly what happened. It took the better part of a week to get our tools rolled out. We were trying to align schedules. We did our best as we could. But we couldn't rely on headquarters to do it, and the Italian guys didn't want to really do it either. So things didn't get done for a few days. It was pretty rough. All intellectual property was gone and inaccessible. And this was a company that relied on it. Intellectual property gets thrown around a lot. It's more germane to some businesses than others in reality. This is a company that had it, that had things like that, that without them there's no operating. We went through different exercises looking at where we might find backup solutions to individual files, anything. They didn't have that. Very, very challenging. They had a SIM, also partially configured, pretty useless, to be completely honest. Poor user rights management. Basically, there was one Italian guy who was an engineer and the IT guy sort of thing. Everybody had something like domain admin rights for some reason in this network. Pretty challenging. They had 5 different antiviruses. Not uniformly applied, just scattered throughout. They were making up their mind about what they wanted to do. Caught them at a bad time. This was a LockerBit version 2 account. So this is basically the top sophisticated ransomware group in the country. I may have the name wrong. Lockbit, thank you. Lockbit 2.0 is elite. It's based out of, I think, St. Petersburg, Russia. Everything is automated, including spread, encryption. This entire operation to encrypt the network from the moment they created access to the moment they're burned off was 4 hours. Best I've ever seen. Best, most sophisticated threat actor I've ever seen personally.
You have like the top team in the league just dunking on.
Just dunking on like the most vulnerable company in North America right now, basically. Brutal, brutal situation.
Look for automotive companies.
Bit of an imbalance. Bit of an imbalance.
Same garbage.
So actually, with ransomware, there was a article put out recently measuring how fast different groups can encrypt files per second. And
Yeah.
Lockbit was actually one of the top ones. So was Conti's unreleased source code. So it just goes to show that these attacks are becoming even more automated, more easily trivial to execute if someone just gets access and just sells the access. So, and the fact is, a lot of mid to small size businesses are moving at a much slower pace to adopt any sense of security.
Is 4 to 8 hours pretty typical of what you'd see of like a Russian actor?
No.
They would move a lot slower.
No, Conti, for instance, was in the earlier network, the big North American industrial company, for a week or two. Poking around, a couple hours on, go eat a sandwich, come back. Heavily manual too. Aside from the batch script that pushed out the final encryptor and executed it, nothing was automated with that particular case. They're still a top ransomware threat by far, but Lockbit 2.0 is amazing.
It's like fully automated.
It's fully, I mean,
Nukes everything.
they wormed it. They wormed it. There was no warning. I think with a lot of cases, ransomware actors have adopted classic network intrusion TTPs, and so they're with the right tripwires, you can kind of see somebody. There was no warning. They basically showed up and just bricked the whole thing, and this company had to pay. We don't recommend paying. It's bad on any one of a number of reasons. You're dealing with a criminal twice. They had to pay twice. Dan reminded me. One of the reasons you don't pay is because they're just going to ask you to pay again, or a third time, or a fourth time, and then make you pay to get your data back, not just decrypt your systems. These guys paid. The second time they came through, their wallet was about $100K lighter. They hadn't paid our retainer fee yet. This was a bad situation in a completely indefensible network. I mean, nothing. Nothing was configured. Nothing was being monitored. No command of the network. No access to most of the network. All these European workforce complications. Sorry.
I'm noticing a lot of these little no logging, bad logging. How do you give confidence to the customer that that was what you found was the actual first incident, that there wasn't preceding incidents?
The
Or that same thing didn't happen
Yeah.
6 months earlier or a year before, especially if patching is really, really old.
The nice
I
thing.
don't know anything about that.
The beauty of what we do is we end up, as long as the operating system is accessible, we have some semblance of logs, right? The operating system is doing more and more logging with each new version of Windows these days. It's getting more and more sophisticated. There are dozens of different artifact types beyond just Windows logging that we rely on. But ultimately, we have to solely rely on what's available on disk there in the operating system, and we cannot rely on anything being aggregated or not aggregated, as the case may be, throughout the entire network. So It's a limitation. It's not ideal, but it's a reality. It's an everyday reality for DFIR. It's going to happen all the time.
Hey Mike, how many times do you think, or do you see repeat compromises of the same customer? Leading question.
Leading question. I mean, it's more than conceivable. You know, it really depends at the end of the day on the executive sponsors' adoption of our recommendations, right? And that's not necessarily just a research, buy whatever our shit is and you'll be good. I mean, usually we're pointing out fundamental things that need to happen at an engineering or architectural level. To be fair, when we do offer recommendations, I see them adopted, anecdotally speaking, more often than I would expect a pen test report, because it's not a hypothetical. Their back's against their wall. People are fluffing up their resumes. You know what I mean? It's an ugly situation. And I don't mean to trivialize anybody's situation. It's an ugly, ugly situation for everybody. Everybody's nervous. It brings out the worst in everybody in the actual victim network, personality-wise. And it's not easy to get through. I don't mean to trivialize how easy it is to secure a network. But if you're not picking up on this already, we're not talking about doing exotic things. We're talking about maybe having a uniform, effective endpoint protection device. We're talking about a uniform 2FA rollout. Aside from Lockbit V2, like we're not seeing best of the best TTPs here. Last one I'll go through. Mid-sized company 3. Big national law firm. Interesting case. Good security stack, by the way. XDR rolled out. Zero trust here and there. They didn't fully know how to use it, but they figured it out during the incident. They had prepared with tabletops. We joined the initial 16 people yelling at each other at all levels of the company, from the CIO down. Pretty interesting. But again, the tabletops I think will matter. They knew what to do in an IR scenario. The XDR had alerted or whatever. They had taken containment steps and stopped an intrusion. Basically what happened was somebody got a phishing email. The phishing email was rightly reported to IT. The IT guy clicked the link though. So the infection kind of started with him. It starts spreading quickly, and I mean like minutes, hours, pretty crazy. It's an accelerated rate of spread, I would say. Something was probably automated. Multiple application servers just going down, being taken over. But they knew their tech stack pretty well, to their credit. This admin guy aside who clicked on the link, they knew their environment. They knew what applications they needed up. They had an asset inventory. They had this XDR deployed. I wasn't a big fan of XDR, but I kind of respected it after this case. They had robust, trusted backups. There was a lot of positives, frankly. These guys deserve a lot of credit. The learning opportunity, the antagonism we received from their IT security people who kind of probably worried about their jobs. We were not there to obviously supplant anybody. We're there to augment. Got so bad we had to talk to the CIO and have him come to Jesus in a really forceful way. That's never had to happen before. But more than anything, big national law firm, this impacted their operations. Like people couldn't access certain applications, right, within the network, nationally, globally. And again, that costs money. And like every DFIR provider, that billable rate is high. The antagonism, though, I can't say enough about it. I've never seen anything like it before or since, but it was just open hostility, probably because of the legal culture in that environment, now that I think about it. I think everybody's just used to yelling at everybody there. Yelling at your DFIR firm in the wake of like an outbreak, though, not a great idea. You could, read the room a little bit.
Well, are they yelling? Are they yelling just because they yell at everybody, or are they?
I think so. In hindsight, I think so.
Were they based in New York?
No, New Jersey.
Chicago.
Oh, Chicago. Okay, makes sense. I was waiting.
Can't trust those Chicagoans, right? You know what was also really interesting was the calmest, most sophisticated guy in the room was the CIO. They had no CISO, coincidentally. But this guy more than filled the shoes. He was able to calm the rancor. He understood the environment. He knew what applications they needed. And those tabletops had clearly had a major effect on him. So now I wanted to sort of step through some of the trends. Things that we probably highlighted, but I'm going to call out specifically. Victimology-wise, yes, this is a very small sample set of cases, but they bridge any one of a number of different industry verticals, sizes, security maturity stacks. Some had fully adopted the cloud, some had done a hybrid, some had done none. The victim has no real face in the wake of a ransomware attack. It's strictly by opportunity. It's no longer about the data assets you have, their resale value, or their national security value. It's pure opportunity. Technology-wise, none of the clients actually had EDR, to be fair, which, being DFI company, we're big fans of EDR technology. It's great for process level information, similar things. No company had that. As I belabored early on, you need to evaluate who your MSPs are very, very closely. Audit them, challenge them, test them. That's just about being a good partner. It's not necessarily being untoward somebody. The same thing would be true of an MDR service provider or something like that. People could disagree, but the more I see it, you either invest today or you pay tomorrow. I'm going to get paid either way. Everybody pays, and it's costly. It's insurance. The claim you submit. It's the fire consulting hours. In the end, you're not actually saving money neglecting the security of your IT environment, in my opinion. The other big lesson is partially deployed software, whether it's some new whiz-bang security thing, doesn't matter if it ain't deployed, right? It's just not a value. It does not count towards your security maturity and ultimately bettering the security posture of your organization. So for my money, I see most of these examples, most of them are preventable. Very preventable. Not exotic. We're not talking about exotic things. We're talking about a comprehensive 2FA rollout, like I mentioned. We're talking about a uniform endpoint security product that actually does security, provides value. We're talking about an MSP that actually manages an environment, something like that. They're simple things. Reality. I probably come across as a little bit harsh in this, and it's easy to certainly make light of other people's misfortune. I don't mean to suggest that too. I think the last case study in particular, the company that weathered the ransomware attack the best, prepared for it. I don't want to trivialize that, but they did. They were resilient. They had actions in place. They detected and responded to the threat before an encryptor took place. Spread had occurred, but they were able to contain most of that. They knew their environment inside out. That cost nothing. That's a spreadsheet. It doesn't need to be. That could just be a spreadsheet. That could be the ability, based on a mature SIM scenario, to just print out what assets you have. You know what I mean? It doesn't matter. We're not looking for an ebook about your environment. It just needs to be there. The host information needs to be there. And I think ultimately, while they're exceedingly difficult to get along with and didn't get along with themselves, they were familiar with the concept of incident response, right? They understood what they needed to do, at least at a high level, and they were able to execute on that in a matter of hours to prevent a much bigger scenario. So that resiliency is what I want to call out here. A few more practical lessons. This will be the last slide, second to last slide. Cooperate with the DFIR team, always a good idea. Near-term benefits include saving your organization. Long-term benefits, hey, if you want to look like a hero, be a hero in a crappy situation like a ransomware incident. You know what I mean? You can still look good. You can still save face if you feel insecure about yourself after an attack as a victim organization. You can still save face. It doesn't need to be a resume-generating event. Know your network. But more than that, that gets said all the time, asset inventories. Know what kind of O365 authentication you use. Are you using modern or using basic? How many people even know that? But we got 2FA role, but what kind of authentication do you have? These are all serious considerations. What does your cyber liability insurance policy look like? Is there a DFIR firm that's filled in there? Do you have the ability to choose anybody you want? Are you subject to the insurance policy or insurance carriers panel? The panel is the group of DFIR providers that basically service claims. The downside of that is that could take 3 days. And if you're hard down, that's not going to fly, right? Knowing those details, knowing yourself, super important. Obviously, know your vendor's true worth. If you're relying on an MSP, MSPs are great, by the way. They're just plenty of trash out there, too. Good security hygiene. Patching. Again, this is something within everybody's means. Keeping up an aggressive schedule, especially for public-facing devices like Exchange servers. I wouldn't expect the classic IT admin to necessarily be up on like proxy logon and all that whole family of vulnerabilities there. I get that, but I think it's probably a good idea to just patch on a fairly regular scheduled basis. Enforce that 2FA comprehensively, and I can't say this enough because people are getting exposed all the time by this in our cases, that having that trusted, immutable backup strategy is super huge. And this is what was classic IT is now really just security too, right? There's a security nexus to these classic IT functions, whether it's the ability to access a remote endpoint that may be disconnected from the corporate network, but being able to do that via cloud, or the ability to have a comprehensive backup strategy. How many of us are doing that? Anyway.
I will say, backup strategy without recovery is not a backup strategy.
We agree.
I ran into an incident where everything was backed up and their ability to recover any one node died.
Yeah.
Yeah. But a ransomware incident, no way. It would take them a whole month.
Well,
With their backup system. Because it's just not, they weren't set up to recover en masse.
exactly. I mean, how practiced is that? You know what I mean? I've worked for the big Fortune 500 companies. We had those good backup systems, or we're performing those scheduled backups on a daily basis or whatever, based on priority and so forth. But how often do we practice restoring them? How many times do we go through that process?
It isn't even just that, it's just the scale of recovery.
Yeah.
These
Yeah.
things are set up to absorb data and keep it and never let it go. Recovering is a different matter.
Yes.
You're trying to do it en masse, that's a completely different problem. And that's something I've seen this, with the hierarchical storage managers in the back. That whole crowd, it's like, recovery is just as big a deal. And I
It's
haven't
huge.
seen the time, people, really hype that. I mean, their ideas are basically, take snapshots, and it's like, well, that's not a bad
The other thing I didn't emphasize, in all these cases, the attackers went right after the backups, like day one. I mean, they targeted it, they figured it out. Whatever the solution was, went after that, encrypted that too. So if that's not a backup solution, put it that way. Parting quote, professor of mine from school back in the day had all these quips. The best one was this one, though. Smart people don't learn from their mistakes. They learn from other people's mistakes. That's sort of the point of this talk. Do better than these guys. You know what I mean? Learn from the lessons. This is effectively threat intelligence in a weird, backwards way. And I hope it has some value to you guys. Anyway, thank you. Cool.
There's no questions from
Yeah, please, questions.